Hello Internet, it's Skorkowski. Today we'll be taking a look at the classic Call of Cthulhu scenario, Paper Chase. Written by John Sullivan, the scenario first appeared in 1983's Cthulhu Companion. 2018 it was revised and updated by Mike Mason for the 7th edition starter set. The scenario is pretty short, easily playable in a single 2 to 4 hour session. It's also specifically designed for new players as a way to introduce them and their characters to the world of Call of Cthulhu. It features a mystery, classic Lovecraftian monster, is playable without any need for combat at all. But most notably, Paper Chase is a solo adventure, meaning that you only need a game master and a single player in order to play it. Although it is possible to play this scenario with 2 characters, I really wouldn't recommend doing any more than that. Adventures with 1 or 2 characters are about as Lovecraftian as it gets. It gives them that feeling of isolation, as well as the knowledge that if our hero goes down, they ain't got no party of friends to come and save them. The original scenario was only 3 pages long, but the new starter set version has brought that up to 11 pages. Much of that's being art, and the rest is just small tips and suggestions that kind of help new keepers along in learning the ropes for this system. But I do have a few suggestions of my own to give, so what I'm going to do is offer those, as well as my criticisms as a game master who has run this scenario. And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm going to be giving this one to you from a player's side of things, but let's be honest, I'm mostly here to tell jokes. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop now. But send your keeper this way to see if Paper Chase is something that they should run for you. But if you keep going, you're gonna ruin the surprise. Okay, keepers, let's get to work. The scenario takes place in 1922 in a small Michigan town. Now, you can move the town anywhere else you like, and it doesn't have to specifically be in 1922. The player characters are hired by Thomas Kimball. Now, Kimball might have hired the player characters through the SEO, which all the starter set pre-gens belong to, and that's perfectly fine. But personally, I think it works a lot better if Kimball is an old friend, like an old college buddy or something who either the player character is visiting at the time the adventure starts, or maybe Kimball has called them over for help.
Hey Tommy, this is a great place you got here. Thanks for inviting me over. We are going to have so much fun. We're going to go up to the Great Lakes. I just bought a brand new fishing rod, and it is going to... Oh, you just invited me here so I could do a job for you? Yeah, I mean, that's cool too, I guess.
The story is that Thomas's uncle, Douglas Kimball, vanished about a year before, and Thomas has inherited or is at least taking care of his uncle's old house. A few nights ago, someone broke in and stole several books from his uncle's study.
Well, clearly those books are pretty valuable, and being that this is a Call of Cthulhu game, I'm sure they contain some sort of dark and forbidden knowledge. Or maybe, if you were to read select passages between them, they form some sort of secret message.
Now, none of the books are valuable, and Thomas doesn't even know specifically which books it were that were taken, but the spaces that they occupied on the shelves are all clearly visible. You could mention how there's dust on the bookshelves, and you can see that kind of book-shaped print that the missing books took, so that way you can count them up and see that yes, 6 books are missing.
Okay, but if you don't use your uncle's study, how do you even know about the break-in?
The module doesn't say. So what I suggest that you do is have Thomas mention that maybe he heard somebody shuffling around downstairs, like it was up late at night and he just couldn't sleep, and all of a sudden he could hear somebody moving downstairs. Or maybe he heard a crash as a lamp or a vase or something got knocked over and destroyed as somebody was moving around the dark room. By the time Thomas got downstairs and got into the study, there was nobody there, but that's when he noticed that there were several books missing. Thomas wants to find out who stole the books, hopefully get them back, and see if this is somehow tied to his missing uncle. He offers to let the player characters stay in his house and offers to pay them $10. The module says that comes to $240 in today's currency, but an online inflation calculator has that closer to $150.
$10? Well, it's a good thing, I guess, that you let me stay in your place. Save me the cost of a hotel room, am I right? Not that that really helps me with my cost of my gas and my train ticket and that fishing rod I'm not going to be using. But hey, as long as I'm here, I'm going to be making a couple long-distance phone calls and emptying out your refrigerator, as well as maybe keeping a couple of your bath towels, you cheap bastard.
Because this is meant to be an introductory adventure for new players, either the ones that are new to role-playing in general or just new to investigative games, the module suggests giving the player some initial hints as to what it is that they can check out. Most of these make sense, checking the house or the neighborhood, checking with the police, maybe there's been other break-ins nearby, or researching any stories that might appear similar or have gone back a few years in the past dealing with that neighborhood or just with the Kimball house itself. However, I don't like the cemetery being mentioned up front. All the other clues will lead the player character to the graveyard eventually, so I see no need to bring attention to that at the very beginning of the adventure, because the player might simply bypass all the other options and just go straight for the graveyard.
And believe me, this is a Call of Cthulhu game. Graveyards come with the territory, and if your player knows that there's an option to checking out a cemetery, that is going to be the first option that they check out.
The module does provide a keeper map showing several important locations and their relation to one another. There's also a player map, however, I don't like it. Titling it Douglas's World is a bit telling. Second, it clearly shows the path to the cemetery. So if you photoshopped out the path like this, it still brings too much attention to the graveyard because it's taking up half the map. So I prefer one of just the house. Then when the player character investigates outside the house, outside the study window, you might mention to them, oh, you can see a graveyard back there. And then if the player character makes a tracking roll, they might find the path that Douglas used to take. The module does a great job of offering the different places that the player character can go in order to follow the investigation, interesting characters for them to meet, and plenty of game master tips on how to handle the unexpected if the player character misses their rolls.
Thomas Kimball is also a very useful tool for keepers to use. He is your Jack the NPC character because he can kind of step in and maybe push the player characters along with a friendly nudge now and again if they get well and truly stuck. Oh, my uncle used to keep a diary and he wrote lots of stuff in it all the time. Did you find that in a study? Maybe there's a clue inside of it. So you as a keeper can just sit back and relax, let the player character explore and try all whatever crazy ideas they want to do and let them enjoy the game, because you know that if everything goes bad and they get well and truly stuck, Thomas is your safety net.
Now, one suggestion with the diary is keepers, maybe you should put the diary in a locked desk drawer in Douglas's office. That means that the player character can either search the study or the rest of the house trying to find the key for this drawer, in which case they could use their spot hidden rolls. Or if the player character does have locksmith or mechanical repair, they could then use those skills and try to jimmy the drawer open, and that's how they can get to the diary. My only real criticism with this portion of the adventure is there's a lack of handouts. Players might discover a pair of newspaper articles about the cemetery, and I'd have preferred those either in summary form or as kind of mock-ups of the newspaper articles to be available in handout form.
Being that this is meant to be an introduction to Call of Cthulhu, this was a pretty big missed opportunity if you ask me, because there is nothing that says welcome to a game of Call of Cthulhu like a bunch of cool handouts.
Eventually the clues are going to lead the player character to the graveyard. Pretty much all the clues lead the player characters to the graveyard, so that's why I suggest not giving them the upfront clue at the very beginning that they could check out the graveyard, because everything else is going to point them that direction. Because again, if nothing else, you can have Thomas mention it to them if the player character misses all the other clues. Now the player character will have learned that Douglas Kimball used to spend a lot of time reading there, and by following the tracks or any of the other clues, the investigator might open one of the crypts. If they do, a horrible stench will knock them out if they don't state beforehand that they're going to hold their breath before they open the door. Now personally, I think a constitution check should have at least be offered here. If the player character makes that constitution check, if they don't announce they're going to hold their breath, then you could have given the option of exploring all the ghoul tunnels that go beneath the cemetery.
The module says that a failed navigate roll down here gets them lost, but it doesn't even address what a pushed roll might be down here, so here's my idea. If the player character fails their initial navigation check and they decide to push the roll, what that could mean is that they then come up out of the tunnels at the bottom of some crypt, maybe at the other side of town, and they have to crawl over a body that's all gnawed upon inside the crypt, losing a point or two of sanity for that. And then they push off the lid of the crypt and they're the wrong side of town, but hey, at least they made it out alive. But if they fail that push roll, that now means that there's ghouls stalking them up and down the tunnels, and the player character can hear their tittering and chittering as they're trying to flee for their lives, their flashlight losing its battery. And finally they come up underneath a tomb. They have to crawl past a body that's been gnawed upon by ghouls, losing a point or two of sanity for that. But the lid won't come off, and now they're banging on the underside of this tomb, the ghouls closing in. And then somebody comes by and they pull the lid off of the tomb, and the player character's like, oh my god, you saved me, there's monsters underneath the town. town, and the person that pulled off the tomb's all like, I'm a police officer and you're under arrest for grave robbing.
Now, if the player character misses the crypt, or if they open it up and they decide not to check out the tunnels, that's perfectly fine. Another option they have is they can just merely sit back and watch the house to see if maybe the burglar returns, or maybe watch the cemetery to see who might be coming out of the crypt or anything like that. Now, the story of what's going on here is that several years ago, Douglas was reading in the cemetery one night when he met and befriended a ghoul. You know, like you do. Now, eventually, last year, he decided to join them, and Douglas is now transforming into a ghoul. He still loves to read, but now he's out of books. But the Ghoul Pack has decided that they're going to go ahead and close off this entrance to the surface for whatever reason, and Douglas knows that this is going to be his last chance to collect for some of his favorite books from his old study. So if the player characters are watching the house or the cemetery, eventually they're going to see Douglas return to his house to collect more books.
What happens next is totally up to the investigator. Maybe they'll attack this intruder only to then realize that it's Uncle Douglas. And then they'll realize that Uncle Douglas is transformed into some sort of inhuman monster and attack Uncle Douglas because he's transformed into some sort of inhuman monster. Or maybe, just maybe, they'll try talking to him.
What they decide is going to have a huge effect for the rest of the scenario. If they attack him, Douglas is going to defend himself, but only enough to allow him to get away. He's not just going to keep attacking them once they're down and try to kill them. If the player characters do manage to kill Douglas, that's when the rest of the Ghoul Pack will arrive, who've been watching this from the shadows, and that's not going to go very well for the investigator. Instead, if the player characters try to talk to this monster, or maybe shout his name as he's running away, Douglas is going to stop and talk to them, explain everything that's going on, is going to be pretty friendly. However, overcautious investigators who might witness Douglas's break-in but decide not to act right away, maybe decide to lay a trap for the next time he returns, because he's already returned more than once at this point, those player characters are going to face the problem that the last night that Douglas comes in is the night they're supposed to watch him, which means the player character might have set up this great and elaborate trap in order to catch this intruder, but the intruder is never ever going to return. If that happens, if the player character does not act right away, no big deal. Merely have Douglas return several more times. Maybe he's talking to the pack and is convincing them to hold off on closing the tunnels. It's just a couple more days, because he's trying to buy himself enough time to keep going back and getting more and more books. And then when Douglas returns and he encounters the investigators, no matter how that goes, either he's going to be killed or maybe he's going to get back to the ghouls and be all like, yeah, guys, you're right. Let's go ahead and close this off. That will become the last night that Douglas visits the house. This negates any time limit mechanic that the scenario has, because the player has no way of knowing that they're working under some sort of time limit mechanic and that they have to act right away, because if they're just following the adventure, it might look to them like they've got plenty of time in the world, like maybe Douglas will come back a third or fourth time.
This could lead to a lot of fun as more and more books go missing every couple nights, and there's no pattern between the subject matters at all. Like, one of them is the history of Greece, while the other is a pulpy murder mystery novel, and now the investigators ripping their hair out trying to figure out what the common thread between them all is, when the truth is those are just the books that Uncle Douglas wanted to read.
Now, one idea, and I didn't do this one myself, but it's just an idea that I had and I think it might be pretty cool, is to remove the character of Thomas entirely for this scenario, or turn Thomas Kimball into some sort of old family butler, and then change it to where the player character is the one who inherits the house after their Uncle Douglas went missing. I think this might make it a little bit more personal for the player, especially when they confront Douglas, and it's not the uncle of their friend or the uncle of the person that hired him, but their own valued family uncle that's now turned into some sort of monster. The big thing that I like about Paper Chase, that instead of the best answer to the problem being either killing or running away from the monster, the solution that gives the player the most answers and has the best outcome overall is to simply talk to it instead. This is a valuable lesson for not just the characters, but for the players, and creates a very solid foundation of role-playing as being one of the best tactics that a player can use in overcoming any sort of future problems or obstacles, rather than just resorting to violence as the first thing. And that's a lesson that can help them not just in Call of Cthulhu going forward, but in other tabletop games after that. They might always remember that role-playing is sometimes the best option that you have. So, in conclusion, I suggest giving Paper Chase a look.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews and RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day.
You know, I spent that entire game convinced that Thomas had murdered his uncle, so discovering that his uncle was a ghoul was a double shock for me.